Leo Valdez stands apart from the other demigods and heroes of Olympus. But not for the reason you think. See, Leo was never meant to survive this story. Not because of Gaia or any action Leo took, but because the narrative stopped respecting him as a character. But I can fix him. Hello there, and welcome to today's video. Leo Valdez has turned out to be quite an interesting character when it comes to these fixing videos. Rereading the series and really focusing on his POV chapters and the way he's brought up in the other characters' POVs has changed my opinions on him somewhat. When I first read the Heroes of Olympus series, I hated Leo. He was my least favorite character, bar none, except maybe Piper. But as I reread the series over and over, that opinion has softened, and he began to climb up the ranks a little. Not by much. He always remained near the bottom for me. But on this most recent reread, I started to see Leo in a completely different light. I started to see the potential the character actually had, and how with a few easy tweaks, that potential truly could have been maximized. And it was actually quite difficult to untangle the flaws with Leo's writing and set out exactly why I've never liked the character, and how exactly he was failed by the writing. So with all that being said, let's dive into why Leo as a character doesn't work in the Heroes of Olympus series. Leo actually had the greatest promise of all the new demigods introduced in Raiden's sequel series. I mean, he had a beautifully tragic backstory that involved Hera manipulating him as a baby by posing as his babysitter before he accidentally became the cause of his mother's death due to Gaia. The rest of his family then turned on him and banished him to bounce around foster homes and orphanages where he was abused and became a young runaway, forced to learn how to fend for himself. His pain and trauma resulted in him using humor as a coping mechanism to shield himself from the words and views of others, as he developed a fear and hatred of his own power. As the son of Hephaestus, he naturally preferred the company of machines to the company of people, and he was incredible at building those very machines. The story positioned him perfectly as the misunderstood mechanic of the group, the jester who was using humor to hide just how deeply scarred he was. His every POV chapter is laced with sorrow and regret that completely changes how you view him when you're in the heads of the other characters. Despite this exemplary writing start, the cracks begin to show pretty quickly. And, really wouldn't take long for the character writing to utterly collapse, as the jokes never ended. Now, humor is quite a subjective thing, and Leo Valdez's humor has never been something that particularly appealed to me. But I think everyone can agree that as the books went on, Leo's humor began to cross the line from tolerable to juvenile, and more often than not, just quite unpleasant. And it takes two forms that really caught my eye. The first is how Leo tends to treat Frank, essentially bullying him over his weight and his fear of fire. Now, the writing tries to paint this as the growing pains of throwing together several adolescents with different attitudes, personalities, and temperaments together in a confined space. But more often than not, this just comes off as mean-spirited. More so because Raiden forced Leo into this weird love triangle with Hazel and Frank, because he happens to look like a friend Hazel once had. The second is how weird and uncomfortable Leo can get when he's interacting with women. He's often seen attempting to flirt with any female character that appears on the page. Whether they're a friend or foe, single, in a relationship, doesn't matter. Now, there's something to be said for teenage boys constantly trying to flirt with girls and using flirtatious humor to do so. But this always felt weird to me, and it's for two very important reasons. The first is that more often than not, the girls he flirts with verbally say that they're uncomfortable with the way he's interacting with them, and he often carries on anyway. That's not exactly the way to teach young readers how to interact with those around you. The second reason is slightly more innocuous and kind of all the more insidious because of it. Heroes of Olympus had a big push for more diverse main characters, and Leo is one of the prime examples for how poorly Riordan ended up handling that diversity. Because I would classify Leo as a walking Mexican stereotype. His looks are dark-haired and elfin, and, that's fine. But then the book goes on to say that Leo is more attractive than the more stereotypically attractive Jason and Percy. Now, that's a worrying through line with the ethnically diverse characters. They always seem to be coming up short when they compare themselves to the white and beautiful main cast. But that's an issue for another video. The real problem is that Leo embodies the stereotype of Mexican men as short, unattractive, hyperactive womanizers who frequently brush aside women feeling uncomfortable at their flirting, or disregard women when they tell them no. Now, if you wanted, there are ways to make these problems work and to serve a narrative function that pushes Leo's character down an emotional journey of self-discovery. But the story never really commits to this. Yes, the characters often chastise Leo for his actions and comments. That isn't the whole solution, and in fact, it just leads to a bigger problem down the road. But the biggest reason all of this is happening, the reason Leo is written the way he is to further this idea that he's seventh wheeling on the Argo 2. Like all of the other demigods, Leo's story becomes about finding a romantic partner. And that becomes a problem pretty damn quick. See, when you ignore the ending Leo got and you look at how his journey started, it becomes pretty clear that what Leo is searching for as a character is proof that he matters. He's looking for validation, and, that story should write itself. He should start by searching for external validation from those around him, before coming to the understanding that he's got to believe he matters before anyone else can tell him that meaningfully. But instead of going on a journey of emotional self-discovery, halfway through the series, Leo does a 180, and instead he becomes completely obsessed with Calypso. A mistake in so many ways, but one of the biggest is just how toxic their relationship is portrayed to be. Calypso is often verbally abusive towards Leo, and Leo in turn is often calling her names, making fun of her in ways that she actively despises. They don't work as a couple because Leo's story and narrative journey wasn't about finding love. And once he does find her, his every POV chapter becomes obsessed with her, trying to get back to her and figure out how to break her curse. It's maddening. And the whole relationship just serves to retroactively damage Percy's character. Part of the triumph at the end of The Last Olympian was Percy correcting the mistakes of the gods by telling them they need to forgive the Titan supporters of the current war and the last one. He specifically name-drops Calypso as deserving of freedom, and the gods swear the most sacred oath they have that she'll be freed. Instead, the gods are tools and Percy's a jackass for having forgot about Calypso and trusting the words of the gods. And Riordan tries to backtrack on this by making Percy feel bad about it, but the damage is done. Leo as a character is pissed at Percy for something the audience knows isn't his fault and that he has no responsibility for. Leo comes off looking like an asshole, all in the name of a relationship that's hellish to behold anyway. But the story goes out of its way to paint all of this as some triumphant love story taking place at the world's darkest hour. But it's the final act of the story that cements Leo's character assassination, and is the reason I've never liked his journey. The ending of Blood of Olympus sees Leo give his life to stop Gaia. But actually, it's revealed that it was all according to his plan, as he wanted to make his friends believe he was dead, and I suppose to actually die, so that he could use the physician's cure to revive himself, and thus find Ogija and Calypso. All of his backstory has been thrown away, all of his flaws disregarded, so that he could become obsessed with a girl who barely tolerates him. And the worst part is that the story treats this act as noble, as one born of true love and the dynamic destiny of soulmates. And in doing so, the narrative endorses and romanticizes suicide, a mental illness that so many battle all the time. A topic that could have and should have been treated with care and nuance is instead reduced to the most cliché and surface-level aspects in the name of a bad romance. And it exposes a core failing of the character of Leo Valdez. Leo is never allowed to matter unless he's suffering quietly in the corner or sacrificing his own life. His relationship with Calypso was built on shaky foundations to lead us to this final moment that is treated like a grand, triumphant romantic gesture. But it had to break the character entirely, disregarding his journey, throwing aside his hopes and his flaws in order to come together. And it wasn't worth it. Leo Valdez is a character whose pain is treated as a joke, whose loneliness is treated as a gag, and whose death is then treated as romantic. And the story never interrogates any of it. So, let me have a go. Now, fixing Leo is different from fixing Piper and Jason. Those characters had systemic problems that required rebuilding them from the ground up. Leo doesn't. He already has everything he needs to be compelling. The story just refuses to let him use it. So all this fix really requires is exaggerating certain traits that are already there and giving him a clear emotional endgame. So, in my version, Leo is an angry, wrathful loner who takes after his father. Leo's backstory stays untouched. He loved his mother, had a strange and damaging relationship with Hera, lost control of his powers in a way that made him partially responsible for his mother's death, etc. He's a boy who lost his mother, was rejected by his family, and bounced through abusive foster homes. And he would be angry. And it makes sense that Leo naturally is angry. But those same experiences also taught him the value of seeming funny and agreeable, of being perceived as easy to be around. But this isn't true, it's just a defense mechanism. A way for him to avoid the abuse and the verbal taunts by being the funny guy. But in truth, he's angry and hurting. And no one has ever lasted long enough to see past the facade. Because when the facade starts to slip, Leo's innocuous little jokes start to become razor-sharp barbs targeted at the insecurities of those around him. He does serious damage with his words, lashing out at those around him, so that when they reject him, he can feel like it all happened on his own terms. At his core, Leo wants to be accepted and loved for who he is, something his machines give him without conditions. But he still longs for real human companionship, even though he doesn't believe he deserves it. Between his guilt over his mother's death, his fear of his own power, and the years of being told he was unwanted, Leo has internalized the idea that love just isn't meant for him. And when the funny facade slips, he lashes out with those razor-sharp barbs, targeting the insecurities of those around him. Leo's journey in The Lost Hero begins pretty much the same way, with him and Piper believing they were friends with Jason, before everything begins to fall apart. But for Leo, the revelation that these memories are fake cuts especially deep. Like Piper, he's gonna be left reeling, because for the first time in years, he felt accepted. And then he discovered it was all a lie. It reinforces the fear that maybe his family was right about him all along. Now Jason is still going to be given the quest, and Leo still volunteers, only for Jason to tell him that if he can find a way for them to fly, he'll earn his place. And that's a massive mistake. Not because it affects the quest immediately, but because it plants a very dangerous idea in Leo's mind. That he's only accepted if he's useful. So Leo still repairs Festus and finds Bunker 9, but this time he isn't going to be rewarded by becoming a cabin counselor at the end. His value is going to remain conditional. Leo's arc in The Lost Hero centers on confronting his guilt over his mother's death. And that's what eventually brings Hephaestus into focus. When the two finally speak, Leo unleashes years of anger at his father for not protecting him or his mother. And here's where we see that Percy's actions had an effect on the gods, as Hephaestus, shaped by Percy's influence in the previous series, tries to do better, speaking about the importance of connection and admitting his own pain, telling Leo that he once met a Cyclops who he told would have been better served in the company of machines, and that he was wrong about that. But his inexperience leaves Leo uncertain. Maybe that old Hephaestus was right. Maybe machines really are all he should need. Over the course of the journey, Leo grows close to Piper, bonding over their shared experience of having false memories, and opening up about his past. Piper becomes the first person he truly confides in. But even that connection reinforces the same pattern, because more often than not, she's coming to him because she needs something built or fixed. Not on purpose, but it's quietly cementing Leo's belief that usefulness is the price of acceptance. Meanwhile, Leo and Jason are going to be clashing constantly. Leo bristles under Jason's authority and lashes out with words designed to hurt, hitting Jason directly in his insecurities. And Jason doesn't understand the hostility. And Leo doesn't fully understand it either. His anger is really aimed at the gods and the false sense of belonging they gave him. But Jason is the nearest target. The Lost Hero still ends with the trio freeing Hera and Jason regaining his memories. But Leo finishes the story in a very specific place. He's accepted his mother's death and let go of his guilt, but he's also now internalized the idea that acceptance has to be earned. If he's useful enough, maybe he'll be allowed to stay. At Camp Jupiter, Leo's belief is reinforced when he's blamed for being possessed by the Eidolon. Annabeth is the only one who immediately recognizes that it wasn't his fault, seeking him out in the engine room of the Argo 2, and seeing just how much anger and fear he still carries about his powers. And I like the idea of the scene starting with Annabeth finding Leo and realizing he's tapping in Morse code, so she responds in kind. This then becomes the foundation of their friendship as the two engineers of the group, and Annabeth encourages Leo to spend time with Percy, pointing out that Percy's pretty much fireproof and can help Leo if he believes his flames are going out of control. But it's also not just for safety. She believes they'd understand each other and just get along really well. And she's right. As both Piper and Leo grow close to Percy, it unintentionally deepens Jason's insecurity. Watching the people he considers his closest friends bond more easily with a Greek worsens his internal conflict about leadership and identity, further straining the group dynamic. And if you want to hear a bit more about Jason's journey, click the card, or up there I suppose. Throughout the journey, Leo becomes indispensable. He keeps the Argo 2 running, builds tools, fixes problems, and quietly supports the group. But every repair and every success only reinforces the same belief, that as long as he's useful, he'll be allowed to stay. And all of this comes to a head at the end of the Mark of Athena. See, so far, we're positioning Annabeth and Percy as the mentors of the group, the ones with the most experience, helping the other demigods along their emotional journeys. And then they fall into Tartarus. With Annabeth and Percy gone, the group begins fracturing, and Leo becomes the clearest sign of the strain. He withdraws, he overworks himself, and he's lashing out more sharply than ever, convinced he should have done more to stop them from falling. And as such, Leo becomes Jason's first real test as a leader. See, because Jason's going to confront him over his behavior, chastising Leo for making everyone feel worse. And the argument's going to turn heated, even physical, as Jason tries to force Leo into the rigid Roman structure he believes leadership requires. And it's not going to go well for him. After rescuing Annabeth and Percy, Jason realizes he was wrong to push Leo the way he did. When he goes to apologize, Leo finally opens up about his fear of losing everyone's acceptance if he isn't useful. And that resonates with Jason, because he recognizes the same fear in himself. And in that moment of understanding, he realizes something far worse. See, Jason realizes that Leo doesn't plan on coming back from this quest. In Leo's mind, dying to stop Gaia would finally absolve him of all of his guilt, and ensure that his friends remember him fondly forevermore. But before Jason can stop him or try to talk to him anymore, the battle's already underway. Hephaestus and Leo show themselves to be one of the best teams the gods have, working in tandem and alternating between crafting machines on the fly and physical attacks. But that's not enough. The battle against Gaia turns desperate. Even with the gods' help, they're losing. And when Leo sees Piper failing to put Gaia to sleep, he seizes a final chance to weaken Gaia, flying Festus directly at her and unleashing bombs and carnage, with Hephaestus fighting beside him. Seeing that it was all still not enough, Leo thanks his father, telling him he loves him, and he's sorry he didn't appreciate him the way he should have, and begs him to make sure Festus survives, before unleashing his fire, losing control entirely on top of Festus, who has Gaia in his claws. The three crash into the ground as all of Leo's pain and anguish come pouring out as he stokes his fire further. As Leo begins yelling to the sky all the bitter things he's ever felt and experienced, as his flames begin to start damaging Gaia and becoming too hot for even Leo to handle, Hephaestus arrives. He strides through the flames, holding Leo in his arms as his son begins to alternate between yelling out his feelings and insulting his father. Meanwhile, Hephaestus begins to add his own fire to Leo's, and the explosion that follows is massive, with both gods and demigods averting their eyes. When the smoke clears, Gaia is left grievously wounded, and while she's distracted, Piper sings her Cherokee charm-speak song, and is helped by a spirit worshipped by her tribe, to put Gaia to sleep. A sleep that she'll never be able to wake up from. But now, with Gaia defeated, the others see Hephaestus confront Leo, having offered his own divine protection to prevent his son's death. I like to think that maybe, Hephaestus has actually taken a little bit of damage, and that's how he, it was almost like at the cost of his own protection he gave Leo. But, the details will come later, I suppose. And Leo is angry. He wanted the pain to stop. He wanted to finally feel like his life had meaning. But now he feels like he's all alone with his pain again. And that's when Hephaestus stops him and tells him,
"You don't get to decide that you're only worth something when you burn."
He tells Leo that he matters, even when he's angry. Even when he loses control. Even when he fails. He tells Leo that as he's watched over him, he's seen that Leo has never believed that there existed a machine he couldn't fix. That even something broken still had worth. And he tells Leo that it's high time he started believing that about himself. So now it's time to start working. And this leaves Leo in an interesting place going forward. I mean, his issues aren't entirely resolved. There's a lot of work he needs to do. But now he has a goal. He has a way forward, and any future book Leo shows up in can show the emotional growth as he comes to accept himself and the love his friends have for him. In the Heroes of Olympus series, Leo is seen favorably by the fans for his humor and quick wit, his engrossing backstory, and his heroic sacrifice. They often characterize him as a brave and funny ladies' man, one of the best aspects of a flawed story. But when you actually look at the story, and Leo's place within it, you start to see the heroic punching bag. The one man the story truly left behind, and a man who was thrown into a toxic relationship to give the illusion of happiness and fulfillment. The story only ever lets Leo be sincere when he's hurting, and only ever lets him be important when he's willing to disappear. See, Leo in canon has to die to prove he mattered. But here, we've created a character who lives because someone refuses to let him decide that his pain was the point. At its core, Percy Jackson is a series of stories aimed at younger readers. And unfortunately, its sequel series makes the common mistake of conflating pain with character depth. And the consequence of that mistake is that it joins a long line of stories where the saddest character becomes the one we're the most comfortable with killing off. Leo Valdez didn't need a better death. He needed a story that believed he was worth keeping alive.